Every single month, hundreds of families in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Florida wrote their checks. $50 here, $100 there. Some months even more. They paid without question because they trusted the system. They trusted the man who ran their homeowners association. They trusted him with their money. They trusted him with their community. And while they were busy paying their bills, working their jobs, raising their families, he was busy too. He was busy buying himself a brand new $60,000 boat. With their money. And when the truth finally came out, what investigators discovered was so shocking, so outrageous, so absolutely infuriating, that it made national headlines overnight. This is the story of the most corrupt HOA president in America. And by the end of this video, you will never look at your HOA fees the same way again. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, this is the place where we expose the real stories happening across America. Stories about power, corruption, and ordinary people fighting back. Today's story is one that will make your blood boil. Because it is not just about one corrupt man. It is about a broken system that allowed him to steal from his own neighbors for years, right under their noses without anyone noticing. It is about what happens when ordinary people are given power and zero accountability. And it is a warning to every single American who pays HOA fees every month without ever asking where that money actually goes. Stay with me until the very end. Because this story has twists that will absolutely stun you. The story takes place in a middle-class suburban neighborhood called Pelican Bay Estates in Sarasota, Florida. It was the kind of neighborhood that looked perfect on the surface. Clean streets, manicured lawns, a community pool, a clubhouse. Everything well maintained and picture perfect. The residents were working-class families, teachers, nurses, contractors, retirees. People who had worked hard their entire lives to own a home in a nice neighborhood. They paid their HOA fees every single month without fail. Between $250 to $350 per year per household. With over 300 homes in the community. That added up to nearly $100,000 every single year flowing into the HOA account. His name was Gary Hendricks. And he had been the president of the Pelican Bay Estates HOA for 9 consecutive years. He was charming. He was confident. He always showed up to community meetings with a smile and a firm handshake. He gave long speeches about how much he cared about the neighborhood. He talked about property values and community pride and keeping the neighborhood beautiful. And the residents loved him for it. They kept re-electing him year after year. They trusted him completely. What they did not know was that behind that smile, Gary Hendricks had been quietly helping himself to the community funds for years. Not once, not twice, but consistently, methodically, and greedily, for nearly a decade. It started small. Investigators later discovered that in his first year as president, Gary had written himself a check from the HOA account for $800, labeled as reimbursement for office supplies. There were no receipts. There were no invoices. Just a check written to himself, cashed the next day. When nobody questioned it, he got bolder. The following year, he wrote himself 3 checks totaling over $4,000, labeled as maintenance expenses, landscaping costs, administrative fees, all completely fabricated, all completely unchallenged, because nobody was watching. Nobody was auditing the accounts. Nobody was asking questions. Gary had set up the HOA's financial system in a way that gave him complete control and zero oversight. He was the only one who had access to the bank statements. He was the only one who approved the expenses. He was the only one who signed the checks. It was the perfect fraud. And it worked beautifully for 9 years. By his 8th year as president, Gary had stolen nearly $230,000 from the community fund. And what did he spend it on? A brand new $60,000 Sea Ray boat, which he kept docked at a private marina 20 minutes from his home. Expensive vacations to the Bahamas and the Caribbean, paid for with HO.A credit cards. A brand new pickup truck, leased using the HOA's business account. Home renovations on his personal property, billed to the HOA as community maintenance. Lavish dinners and entertainment, expensed as HOA board meeting costs. While his neighbors were scraping together their annual HOA fees, Gary was living like a king. On their money. In their faces. With a smile on his face every time he attended a community meeting, the fraud unraveled in the most unexpected way. A retired accountant named Margaret Chun had recently moved into Pelican Bay Estates. She attended her first HOA annual meeting and asked a simple question, one that nobody had ever thought to ask before. She asked to see the financial statements. Gary laughed it off. He said the finances were in great shape and that there was nothing to worry about. Margaret was not satisfied. She formally requested access to the HOA's financial records, which is every homeowner's legal right. Gary stalled for weeks, then months. He made excuses. He said the accountant was unavailable. He said the records were being updated. He said there was a software issue. But Margaret was not going away. She filed a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation. And that complaint triggered an official investigation. When state investigators finally gained access to the HOA's bank records, what they found was staggering. Transaction after transaction. Check after check. Wire transfer after wire transfer. All going directly to Gary Hendricks or to vendors that investigators quickly discovered did not exist. Shell companies that Gary had created himself to funnel the stolen money through. Fake invoices for work that was never done. Receipts for supplies that were never purchased. The total amount stolen, $234,000 over 9 years. The boat was found at the marina, registered in Gary's name. The credit card statements showed the Bahamas trips. The truck was parked in his driveway. Gary Hendricks had stolen from his neighbors for nearly a decade and spent every single dollar on himself. And when investigators knocked on his door, he actually tried to claim it was all a bookkeeping error. When the news broke in the community, the reaction was explosive. Residents who had trusted Gary for years were devastated. Some were furious beyond words. Others were in tears. People who had been stretching their budgets to pay their HOA fees every year now realized that money had been paying for Gary's boat trips to the Bahamas. Community meetings turned into screaming matches. Residents demanded answers. They wanted to know how this had gone undetected for 9 years. They wanted to know who else was involved. They wanted their money back. And they wanted Gary Hendricks in handcuffs. They did not have to wait long. Gary Hendricks was arrested 3 weeks after the investigation became public. He was charged with grand theft, fraud, and organized scheme to defraud, a felony under Florida law. His mugshot was all over the local news. The same smiling face that had stood at community meetings for 9 years now stared out from a police booking photo. At trial, Gary's defense team argued that the financial records were confusing and that many of the transactions were legitimate business expenses. The jury did not buy it. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. Gary Hendricks was sentenced to 7 years in state prison and ordered to repay the full $234,000 to the community. The boat was seized and sold at auction. The proceeds went back to Pelican Bay Estates. But here is the part that the headlines missed. Yes, Gary went to prison. Yes, some of the money was recovered. But the real damage to that community could never be fully repaired. The community pool had not been properly maintained because Gary had been diverting the maintenance funds. The clubhouse roof was leaking because repair budgets had been stolen. The community's reserve fund, Money set aside for major repairs had been completely wiped out. Residents were now facing a massive special assessment to cover all the deferred maintenance. In other words, not only had their money been stolen, but now they had to pay even more money to fix the damage caused by the theft. The trust that had held that community together for years was shattered. Neighbors who had been friends for decades now looked at each other with suspicion. And Margaret Chun, the retired accountant who had asked one simple question and uncovered the entire fraud, received anonymous threats and hate mail from a small number of residents who blamed her for destroying the community. So what can you do to make sure this never happens in your community? First, always demand annual financial audits from your HOA. Every homeowner has the legal right to see the financial records. If your HOA president resists, that is a massive red flag. Second, make sure your HOA has proper financial controls. No single person should ever have sole access to the bank accounts and the ability to sign checks without a second board member's approval. Third, attend your HOA meetings. Ask questions, especially about money. Where are the fees going? What is the reserve fund balance? What are the major expenses this year? Fourth, if your HOA is managed by a company rather than a volunteer board, research that company thoroughly. Check their reviews, their credentials, and their track record. And fifth, if you ever suspect financial misconduct in your HOA, report it immediately to your state's Department of Business Regulation. Most states have specific agencies that oversee HOA financial management. Gary Hendricks sat in his jail cell while his neighbors struggled to pay unexpected repair bills for a community he had bled dry. The $60,000 boat, the symbol of his greed, was sold at auction for $42,000. That money went toward fixing the community pool that children had been unable to swim in for 2 summers. Justice was served. But it came at an enormous cost. The real lesson of this story is not just about one corrupt man. It is about what happens when communities stop paying attention. When we blindly trust without verifying. When we assume that someone else is watching. Because in HOA communities across America right now, there are people just like Gary Hendricks, people who have been given access to community funds with little to no oversight. And without residents like Margaret Chun, who ask the hard questions, they will never be caught. Be the Margaret Chun in your community. Ask the questions. Demand the answers. Protect your money. And share this video with every neighbor you have, because this story could be happening in your neighborhood right now, and you might not even know it. If you want more real stories like this, subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell. We will see you in the next one.